Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life. In our last episode, we saw Elizabeth say yes to Prince Albert. He had to try 3 times before she finally said yes. After that, they were both ecstatic. In this episode, we will find out about the wedding and all that happened before and after the vows were taken. I just wanted to take a moment to say that if you are enjoying the video, if you could subscribe, it would really help me out. And click on the notification bell and you will be alerted when a video is released. And also, if you enjoyed the video, if you could give it a thumbs up, that would be great too. Well, let's get started with Elizabeth and Albert. Well, to start the mood off, crowds gathered that morning early, and they were on Bruton Street and all along the route to the Abbey. Spring was just beginning, so it was a cold, damp, blustery day. And Queen Mary noted, though, that the sun came out between the showers. School children were lucky they were given the day off from school, and the king requested that His Majesty's ships be dressed overall and fire a salute at noon. And while the bride was getting ready, the family left for Westminster Abbey. Just after 11 a.m., Queen Alexandra left Marlborough House. 1 minute later, the king and queen drove out of Buckingham Palace with the sovereign escort of the household cavalry. At 11:13, the bridegroom, attended by the Prince of Wales, followed them, and 1 minute before that, Elizabeth had set off from Bruton Street with her father, and then someone took a picture of her and her father, one of the press people. She and her father drove in a state landau, escorted by 4 mounted metropolitan policemen. Elizabeth was touched by the warmth of the crowds in the streets. Her father, he was in low spirits, knowing that he was giving away his daughter. This was the first marriage of a king's son in the Abbey, and only the third royal marriage to take place since Richard II had married Anne of Bohemia in 1382. Wow, that was a long time ago. It had become a custom for royal marriages to be celebrated privately until Princess Patricia of Connaught's marriage in Westminster Abbey in 1919, and followed by that of Princess Mary in 1922. Well, the 3 prime ministers, past and present, were there: Bonar Law, Lloyd George, and Asquith. And Winston Churchill was also there. Asquith wrote the next day that the crowds in the streets were large and they must have been drenched to the skin by the persistent showers throughout the day. The best view of the ceremony was enjoyed by 52 boys seated high up in the triforium. They had been invited by the Duke's special request to represent young industrial workers. And that was nice of him. And then there were fewer guests at Elizabeth's wedding than there had been to Princess Mary's wedding. The king had wanted to keep the cost of the wedding low, so the king ruled out construction of the special stands that increased seating in the Abbey. But they had a large crowd, and there were 1 million spectators lining the processional route, and there was also large press coverage. The king was wearing the uniform of an admiral of the fleet. Queen Mary had a dress and turban of aquamarine and silver. The king and queen were with Queen Alexandra and her sister, the Dowager Empress Marie Fedorovna, Prince George, and Princess Mary. There was 14 members of the royal family. On the other side was the bride's family, and according to press accounts, Lady Strathmore was wearing a handsome gown of black moroccan under a black cloak with a collar of blue roses. Her eldest daughter, Mary Elphinstone, was dressed in a spectacular embroidered outfit of dove-gray satin with jade and gold roses, a large plumed hat, and sable wrap. Dorothy Glamis, beautiful and elegant, wore soft silver. The Duke of York was the first member of the royal family to be married in the dress uniform of the Royal Air Force. He wore the Garter ribbon and the Star of the Order of the Thistle, and he did that to honor his Scottish bride. He also had a row of medals. He was supported by the Prince of Wales, wearing the uniform of the Grenadier Guards, and by Prince Henry in the uniform of the 10th Hussars. Awaiting the bride were her 8 bridesmaids. They were nieces and old friends. All wore ivory-colored dresses of crepe de Chine with bands of Nottingham lace covered with white chiffon. Around their waist, they had leaf green tulle sashes held in place by a white rose and a silver thistle, and in their hair they wore a bandeau of white roses and myrtle leaves. Each bridesmaid also wore her gift from the bridegroom, a carved crystal brooch in the form of a white rose of York with a diamond center, carrying the initials E and A. The older bridesmaids wore silver shoes. The two young ones, who were carrying the train, had on white shoes, and they all carried bouquets of white roses and white heather. The bride was on time just as the sun came out of the clouds. She was wearing a dress of cream chiffon amore with applique bars of silver lame embroidered with gold thread and heads of paste and pearl. The gown was a deep square neckline and short sleeves, a straight-cut bodice, and a slightly gathered skirt with a short train set into the waist seam at the back. Over the dress she wore a long train of silk net with a lace edging and a Point de Flandres lace veil. Queen Mary lent both the items to her, and the veil was down over her forehead. A simple wreath of myrtle leaves, white roses, and white heather held it in place. Her shoes were of ivory silk moire, embroidered with silver roses, and she carried a bouquet of roses and lily of the valley. When Elizabeth and her father entered the abbey, one of the clergy preceding her fainted, and they had to wait for the procession to continue. Elizabeth left her father's side and went to lay her bouquet of white roses on the tomb of the unknown warrior, placing it at the west end of the nave in honor of the countless British that died in the Great War, whose bodies had never been found, and they had no proper burial. This gesture wasn't expected. People thought later that at the door of the abbey she might have thought of her brother Fergus, who was killed in 1915 at the Battle of Loos. Back on the arm of her father, Elizabeth moved forward to her future. According to the Times, the Duke of York faced with shining eyes and a look of happiness. The girl, hand in hand with her father, was advancing in her lovely old-fashioned dress, gleaming with silver and veiled in old lace. They seemed to think of no one but each other. The families after the service signed the register in the chapel of Edward the Confessor, and the choir sang an anthem composed by Sidney Nicholson for Princess Mary's wedding. It was entitled, "Beloved, Let Us Love One Another." And once they signed the guest books, they took their places again in the sanctuary. Then Mendelssohn's Wedding March, the Duke and Duchess of York returned to the heart of the abbey. They smiled at Lady Strathmore, and she had tears in her eyes. She was moved and sad by everything. She thought her daughter looked lovely and dignified and restful, just her own sweet little self as usual. The couple then bowed and curtsied respectively to the king and queen just before walking back through the full length of the nave, and then by emerging from the abbey into a sunnier day. She and the Duke stepped into their scarlet and gold coach and drove back towards the palace through Marlborough Gate, St. James Street, Piccadilly, around Hyde Park Corner, and finally down Constitution Hill. They were cheered the whole way, and when she got to Buckingham Palace, her bridesmaids and her friends all curtsied to her. At the palace, they had a wedding breakfast for over 60 people, mostly from the two families. It was prepared by the royal chef, Gabriel Schumi, and they had consommé à la Windsor, suprêmes de saumon, René Mary, cutlets de agneau, Prince Albert, chapons à la Strathmore, and Francais Duché Elizabeth. There was just one toast prepared by the king, and he said, "I ask you to drink to the health, long lives, and happiness of the bride and bridegroom." The wedding cake was cut in the blue drawing room. It was 9 feet high, and it weighed 800 pounds. Wow. It was a gift from the chairman, Alexander Grant. Its 3 tiers were decorated with the coats of arms of the Strathmores and the Duke of York, and surmounted by an ornamental confection symbolizing love and peace. The couple requested that Grant arrange slices of identical cake and distribute it at the Duke's expense to thousands of poor children at wedding tea parties arranged for them in London and other cities. So that was nice of him. And at the palace, the Duchess changed into her going-away dress, a soft shade of dove-gray crepe romaine. Over it, she wore a traveling coat wrap. Her brown hat was small, with an upturned brim and a feather on the side. She wanted the crowd to be able to see her face. When they left for the honeymoon, their friends and relations threw rose petals. Cheering crowds accompanied the couple to Waterloo, where a special train awaited them. The carriage was upholstered in old gold brocade and decorated with white roses, white heather, white carnations, and lilies of the valley. The train left at 4:35 p.m., and they went through South London into Surrey countryside and arrived at Buckmanat at 5:10 p.m. The newlyweds received bouquets and listened to an address of welcome. Then they were taken by car to Pleasden Lacey, the home of Mrs. Ronnie Greville, who was delighted to offer it to them. Elizabeth was quick to telegraph her mother, saying, "Arrived safely, deliciously peaceful here. Hope you are not all too tired. Love, Elizabeth." Next we come to the part where Lady Elizabeth wrote in her diary about her special day. She said, "I woke at 8:30, up by 10 a.m., put on my wedding dress, aided by Suzanne and Catherine. It looked lovely. Lots of people in the streets. Did not feel nervous. Bertie smiled at me when I got up to him, and it all went off well." Then she said, "We had a long drive home to BP. Crowds very kind. We were photographed and also went out on the balcony. Then luncheon, and sat between Bertie and the king. After lunch, talked and cut cake, etc. Went to change about 3:20 p.m. Mother and Anne came, then May and Rosie, Mike and David and Father. Awful saying goodbye. B and I drove off at 4:15 p.m. and had a special to Bookham. Very tired and happy. Bed at 12. So I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall in this episode, where we find out just how the wedding day was scheduled down to the letter, and to see all the beautiful gowns and how everybody was dressed. Elizabeth did an unscheduled moment when one of the clergy fainted, and she decided to lay flowers on the tomb of the unknown warrior, thinking perhaps of her brother who had died in the war. And it sounded like a perfect day with the sun coming through the clouds. I know they both must have been on cloud 9. Finally, Elizabeth deciding that she was in love with Bertie and that they could have a future together. So I wish everyone a good day, and tune in again soon for another episode of Queen Elizabeth, A Day in Her Life, where we'll continue with the story of Queen Mother and see what she's up to next. So everybody have a great day. Thank you. Bye.